Welcome to Desert Island Tims. Today's guest is a man whose strength and commitment in his fight for justice and equality is very much admirable. I would like to welcome retired businessman and now activist Tom Minogue. Tom, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, Billy, fine.
So what was life like for you growing up?
It was happy. I was brought up in Rosyth. My brother and I moved there from Yorkshire and were brought up by foster parents. My mother's brother, my Uncle Jack and his wife, and their 3 children. So there was a family of 5 in Rosyth, 4 boys, 1 girl, and we were happy. Rosyth was a thriving place at that time. Rosyth Dockyard was the biggest industrial employer in Scotland, 7,000 people. So a thriving wee place. People coming out of the war, it was good. We had a lot of freedom. And later I realised that probably I had tragic sort of circumstances in being there. Because my brother and I were only there because our parents had died in Yorkshire, and my 2 sisters, they went to an aunt and uncle in London, and my brother and I came here. So, but as a young person, you didn't realise that, and you're resilient. And we used to meet up as a family, the Minogue family, the 4 of us. Once a year we used to go to holiday to my Irish grandfather in Yorkshire, and we got together then. So that was good that we kept together, and we kept together for all of our lives. I'm the last of the survivors now, but that didn't stop us from keeping together. So I had 2 families really, the Minogue family and the family I was brought up with. And yes, I got a good grounding. My uncle and aunt were English Catholics, very devout, and brought me up in that tradition. And yes, very happy.
Your first song then, what would that be?
First song would be the Milwaukee Blues by the Carolina Chocolate Drops. This is an African-American group who they're sort of breaking into what's traditionally been an all-white preserve, the banjo playing, hillbilly music, sort of string band music. And they released an LP, it was called Genuine Negro Jigs. And they're sort of breaking the mould and coming into, as I say, a genre that was obviously considered the preserve of the white Americans. And they're very good at it. That's the main thing. They're good at it.
You first came to my attention with a petition you started looking for transparency from those holding or wielding power. How did you get involved in that?
Well, what took me into that was, towards the end of my business career, I was involved in a commercial dispute about ownership of material, and it soon became a criminal court case purely because of Masonic influence. It should never have been near the courts, and I was eventually cleared of all the charges, but it brought home to me that Freemasonry wasn't a benign influence. It could be a corrosive influence in the justice system, and I challenged Freemasonry at the time of my police interview, and as soon as I appeared in court, because I knew there was a Masonic element in the case, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to be tried in front of a sheriff who was a Mason. In the event, I was tried in front of a woman sheriff, and she gave me her assurances that she wasn't involved with the Eastern Star or whatever, but they were discretionary, and she said if I wanted to have the right to know whether a sheriff or a member of the judiciary did belong to any of these organisations, then that was a political matter, and I would have to take it up with the politicians. So I did, and I petitioned Parliament on these lines so that members of secret societies such as the Freemasons, if they were in the judiciary, they should have to declare that, and then the litigant could have a chance to challenge whether they thought that was right in their case. So that's how I got into that. But having got into that, I then, in my retirement, found no shortage of issues that I felt strongly about. The local park in Dunfermline, Pittencrieff Park, is known as the Glen locally, and the owners of the Glen, or the custodians, wanted to develop it, and Andrew Carnegie had left it for the people. So I got involved in a big campaign to stop the development of that. Then the toll issue with the Forth Bridge. There was a guy called George Campbell who was the lone protester. He caused a public inquiry when they wanted to raise the toll amounts. They wanted to charge more on the tolls. And I supported them on that. And one thing led to another, and having supported him, I ended up standing for Parliament when the local MP died on the ticket of abolish the Forth Road Bridge toll charges. So then the Elgin Marbles, I got involved in that because I considered that there should be an investigation into the artefacts held locally by Dunfermline by Lord Elgin, which had been looted from the Summer Palace and the Parthenon and various other things. So anything that took my interest and I got involved in it, then I've got the time to do it when I'm not watching the children or walking. So I get involved in it and I try to do each campaign justice.
Excellent. So, your second song?
My second song is an old jazz number, Dr. Jazz by Jelly Roll Morton, and it was the first record I ever owned. It was given me by my next door neighbour, my best friend's father in Rosyth, who taught trumpet, and all his sons, he had 4 sons, all played trumpet in bands. That was the days when all the works had bands, and I got an old needle gramophone player from a jumble sale that was unsold, and I had no records to go with it. And my next door neighbour's father, he was quite amused by this, so he gave me some jazz records, and one of them was Jelly Roll Morton's Dr. Jazz, and it introduced me to a kind of music that I've loved ever since.
Dr. Jazz by Jelly Roll Morton. Right, Tom. Who were your influences and heroes?
Well, the man I've mentioned, my Uncle Jack, who I called Dad. You know, I was brought up to think Dad and Mum. And he was probably my biggest influence. He was a quiet man, but a good, honest man, and he was a great influence, a strong, a very moralistic man, and he was probably my greatest influence. And he worked as a shipwright in the side dockyard, and I later worked as his apprentice, and I enjoyed that. But yes, it was him. And my brother who had been orphaned, with me, and who'd come up here, he was influential in that he was very unlucky in life when he was a 20-year-old bricklayer, just finishing his apprenticeship, and he lost his leg to cancer, took it off at the hip, and they said there was a danger of a secondary, which he got just shortly after in his lung, and they took it out, and by medical science, it should have been, or by perceived wisdom at the time, he should then go on to die, but he never. And he waited to die, and nothing happened, and he lived for another 42 years and died of a heart attack eventually, nothing to do with cancer. But his plight, that had a great influence on me as a young man, because obviously, he was still staying in Rosyth with us, and it was very traumatic, and the way he dealt with that was certainly had a big influence on me. It was inspirational in some ways, that when I look at my own life or anything I came up against, I always compared it with what my brother had to put up with, in the way he dealt with it. So yeah, my dad and my brother, I suppose, were the big influences, although later on in life, obviously, people like Nelson Mandela and these sort of figures come, and you look at them and you draw inspiration from them. A man who spent 27 years in prison in terrible conditions, and he could have got out any time he wanted if he'd have renounced violence in the furtherance of his cause, and he didn't, because he had a principle, and people like him, of course, admiration knows no bounds for them.
Your third song?
My third song is a song that I don't really understand. It's called Jimmy My Treasure, but it's got a Gaelic name, and it's sung by Kathleen McInnes, and I heard it first on a BBC Scotland programme. I think it was called Highland Sessions or something like this. But it's a beautiful song, and it brought home to me the fact that you don't really need to understand what the words are. The music was there, and it was obvious from the music it was a sad song. And when I did a wee bit of research and found out it was about a girl whose lover was away sailing on the seas, and her parents wanted to marry someone else, and she said, no, I'll wait for my Jimmy and I'll go and live in the woods if needs be, but I'll wait for my Jimmy, my treasure. When you hear the song, although I don't understand a word of it in Gaelic, but the sentiment is there and you can feel it. It oozes out and it's great.
What are your earliest memories of going to Celtic Park?
Well, I don't really have early memories of going to Celtic Park. My first memories of Celtic were when they visited Dunfermline. And I was a pupil in St Margaret's School in Dunfermline, St Margaret's Secondary School. And the headmaster was a great Celtic supporter. And he took all the boys from the school to a midweek league game. This was before floodlights, remember, when Celtic visited, and it was a 1-1 draw. But that was my earliest memory, and up to that point I'd watched Dunfermline and I'd watched Aberdeen because my mate was an Aberdeen fan. But when I went there and saw the hoops running out at Dunfermline, it was just a memory that's just etched on me to this day. And John Kearney spoke about this in a Celtic Underground interview he did. And I didn't realise until he put it into words how grey things were in those days. You know, and this is 1956, when all fires were coal-fired, people were dirty, grimy, miners were coming home black on the buses, and people's clothes were grey, their cars were grey. It wasn't a colourful place. Mm-hmm. And then just this flash of colour when this emerald green and white come out in the park, boy, it just blew you away. And like Billy Connolly said, it's like a wee party going on in his head when the boys run onto the park. And that was my first impression. So, yeah, I eventually went to Celtic Park, but it just pales into insignificance after that. And, of course, that event also demonstrated what Celtic's about to me, because the headmaster, who'd obviously must have paid for this himself, took it on himself to take the boys to see the famous Celtic Charlie Tully, Bobby Collins, Walsh, Jimmy Walsh, the headmaster had taught Jimmy Walsh apparently. But you know, that was what Celtic were about right from the word go. It was about doing that sort of thing. That was a charitable thing, that was a good thing. Mm-hmm. And of course, the excitement and the colour that day, although it was a drab game, but those colours that day. So that's my earliest memory, and that's what got me hooked, and I've been smitten ever since.
Good stuff. Your fourth song?
Fourth song is The Body of an American by the Pogues. Well, it's a great song. It's about a wake of an American coming back to the land of his ancestors. And like a wake, it starts slow and then speeds up as they get going, just like these things do in real life sometimes at funerals, where it's sad going, but then after, when we've had a few jars and people celebrate the life of the person. So it's got everything. And then I loved it as it is for its music, and I love the Pogues because they've taken traditional Irish music and they've put it to a worldwide audience, just as the traditional dancing was taken all over the world with river dance. The Pogues have done that with a modern variation of traditional Irish music. I love them, they're brilliant. And recently there was a programme on called The Wire, I don't know if you watched it, and one of the last episodes, maybe it was the last episode, they had a mock wake for the main character, a policeman, Jimmy, lying in his coffin, and they did the eulogies in a bar with all these police colleagues around him, and then they switched on The Body of an American. It was the best scene of that whole series, and it was a hit series. You would almost think that they built the series round that one record. It was so good, it was that good. So The Body of an American for me by the Pogues is brilliant.
Right, Tom. What irritates you?
Irritates me? Well, I don't like bigotry, and in particular orange bigotry, which is prevalent in Scotland. And it was brought home to, never have done of course, obviously being brought up a Catholic, although I'm not a practising Catholic now. The bigoted genealogist knows I'm Irish and knows I was once a Catholic, so I'm a target from that respect, no matter what state of grace I'm in with the Catholic Church. So I've been the target in various ways, some minor, some more offensive. But the incident that brought home just how harmful bigotry is on people's lives was an incident with my brother Joe, who I've mentioned earlier. Joe lived in Kelty and married a Kelty lassie. And Joe was very active with the local junior football team, and when I had my business, we helped out. The business helped out with the local juniors and my brother, and we had a great working relationship with them, and my brother was part of that community, and he used to say that there was nowhere else. Kelty was the greatest wee village in the world, according to him. And one day he phoned me, and he was heartbroken, and he confided in me. He'd been to the club on the Sunday morning, which was his ritual. He was a heathen like me, he didn't go to church. And he said there was all sorts of people coming over and telling him about a speaker who had been in the club the night before, telling him jokes, anti-Irish, anti-RC jokes, regaling my brother with these stories. And these were his friends, these were the people he drank with every week in that ex-servicemen's club in Kelty. And he told me, he says, Tommy, he says, this place will never be the same again. He said, I'm finished with it. He said, it's got my heart broken. And he didn't tell his wife or anyone else about this, but he told me. And I understood what he was on about. And that day there'd been an Orange Walk in Kelty. And that day there'd been a Scottish International match. And the walkers and the visiting lodges had all decanted into Kelty Club after their walks. And that night there was a speaker on, an after-dinner speaker, for the junior football club that we'd supported and my brother felt he was part of. And the guest speaker that night was Donald Finlay QC. And of course, Joe got told the stories of this the next day. And I didn't say anything to anybody at the time. But after he died, I put my experiences and my feelings about the corrosive effect on oranges as they'd been seen by my brother, and I put them onto a local Dunfermline blog. I called it Bigotry in Fife. I felt strongly about it, and then, some years later, when I saw Donald Finlay had done this again in a club in Larne, I complained to the Faculty of Advocates about it, because whilst what he did in Kelty upset my brother and hurt his feelings, what he was doing in Larne with Andy Gorham was liable to hurt somebody's head, not their feelings. It might be a pipe bomb through the window when he stokes up these sort of feelings in Larne. So as a frequent user of the Faculty of Advocates and their services, I complained to them. And so did another man, a headmaster from Larbert, a Mr. Lynch. My complaint and Mr. Lynch's were upheld, and he was found guilty of bringing the Faculty of Advocates into disrepute. But by these antiquated sort of rules the faculty have, although he was found guilty by a tribunal of his peers, he got the option to either take his punishment or face the faculty. So my complaint was finished, the faculty took theirs up, and of course they exonerated him or they found him not guilty. That wee example to me describes how these sort of marches, and Orange or the other type as well, if they're Hibernian, I don't agree with them. I think they're divisive, but particularly Orange marches, I think they drive a wedge right through communities, as they did in Scotland. And there was my brother's love of his wee village and his ex-servicemen's club, all wiped out in one night. And it wasn't even that he was there, it was just that everybody was so keen to tell them the jokes that Donald Finlay and co were telling about him and his like.
Your fifth song?
My fifth song is The Pretender by Jackson Browne. Big Jackson Browne fan. I like his music. I've got to like their music. I don't like anybody because of their activism, but in this case Jackson Browne has been a critic of the American administration and in their wars and their social policies. And that's a brave thing for him to do, because he's very successful, but he could be all the more successful if he wrapped the flag round him and went along with it. But he doesn't. He takes the awkward way, and I like him, and I've been to see him quite a lot. And in fact, on one occasion when my son Kevin took me to see him in Glasgow, we were seated next to Walter Smith and his wife at a Jackson Browne concert. So I wasn't a great Walter Smith fan before that, but I thought, well, he can't be all bad if he likes Jackson Browne. So Jackson Browne, because I love him and I love his stance.
How do you relax?
Well, relaxing, walking. I like walking, Billy. I always have liked walking. From when I was young, we used to walk, and there was no TV, of course, when I was growing up. And we used to go on our bikes or walking in the country. So I've always liked walking, and I still enjoy walking yet. And the computer, I've got into the computer since I retired, and just recently I've got into Twitter and Facebook. So I've got lots of interest, and the computer's a great thing. It can take you on journeys that you would never otherwise have went. You know, recently a friend of mine asked me to do up his father's biography on Celtic Wiki. A guy, Hugh O'Neill, who I knew when I was a child. I went to school with his family, and this mate of mine said didn't do him justice. So I went in to research his father's biography, and of course now you've got access to all these newspapers in the 30s, and it's pretty simple to get the information. So I did his father's biography, and then thought it would be only fair that I do all of the biographies for the wiki for that period between 1939 and 40 that his father was there. And I got so interested in researching the information, not just on the football but on the social events of that time. You know, the Spanish Civil War was undergoing, and home news like the Valleyfield colliery disaster. So I couldn't write up my wiki report just on football matches, and I started putting snippets in the trivia about what was happening. And it ended up I was spending more time on the social events on the trivia than I was. And then, of course, I thought it would be selfish if I just kept it at 39 and 40. And in the end, I did the whole of the 30s for the Celtic Wiki. So that was a project that gave me great pleasure to do and took me about 2 years. But it was so interesting. It was terrific. It was wonderful. And computers are great for that. And there was times it caused a bit of friction, of course, and my wife would be saying, "Oh, are you still with us?" I've been married 44 years, by the way, Billy. And she'd say, "I thought you were dead up there." And you could go on the computer and it could take you places and off to tangents where you never thought you'd be, but on interesting ones. So I do find research and things like that. So the wiki, I spent about 2 years doing the 30s for the wiki, and the wiki's now got a complete set of match reports for every game that Celtic played from 1930 to 1940, but they've also got a lot of social commentary in that period as well. And of course, that's seen through my eyes, but that's, you don't have to like it if you don't. And I try to get some interesting and amusing things as well. So yeah, the Celtic Wiki took up a big part. I've had to drop off that now because I've got other things on the go at the minute, but I dare say I'll go back to the wiki again. So there's no shortage of things that take my attention, and when I get a bit stressed out, then the walking comes in, and with having 4 grandchildren, well, there's not enough hours in the day.
Right, your 6th song.
My 6th song is If They Come in the Morning, or No Time for Love by Christy Moore. It's a very powerful song about dawn raids, the police dawn raids. And I went to the Merchant Navy, and I travelled the world when I was just 20, and I was in America just at the end of segregation. I was in South Africa for apartheid, and I've spoken to people who lived and sailed with men from Belfast, where they would get the dawn raids. They kicked the door in the morning, and I've seen it, in fact, in South Africa under apartheid, and I've seen them where they round the people up and march them into the police cells in the morning, and they're beating them as it goes. So all these dawn raids that are associated with fascist countries and what you read about them in totalitarian states. And then when I think about it, today in Scotland you've got dawn raids for 15-year-old boys. And it really makes me wonder, have we come this low, that this is what we've come to with this new offensive behaviour at Football Act. Where supporters of not just Celtic Football Club, which is my club, but other clubs as well, are being raided by the police on spurious grounds of singing a few words or brandishing a flag. And we've got dawn raids, and we're putting ourselves in the same camp as these horrible fascist dictators who did these dawn raids. So I think Christy Moore's song is powerful in what he talks about, Northern Ireland and all the countries he alludes to in the songs, and sometimes he changes the verses, but it's applicable today in Scotland, and that's very sad. But Christy Moore's, they come in the morning.
So what does the future hold for you, Tom?
Well, at present I'm petitioning the Scottish Parliament. I'm pretty busy with that just now. This is the second time at trying to get justice personnel or professionals, people who are decision makers in our justice system, to register if they belong to any secret societies, or such as the Freemasons, or societies that have a bias against any individual or group because of their race, religion or colour. This would be the Orange Order, BNP, that sort of group. I think we should know if our decision makers and our jurors in court cases have got any organisational ties to these groups. And it was brought home to me by Paul McBride's very dramatic and powerful commentary on the Neil Lennon case, when even though a man had admitted assaulting Neil Lennon, 6 million people had saw it on television, and he'd apologised through his counsel for assaulting Neil Lennon, an Edinburgh jury found that he hadn't assaulted Neil Lennon. Mm-hmm. And the late Paul McBride said there would need to be a fresh look at jurors. And while my first petition looked at judges, I realised that, yeah, often the people who are actually making decisions in court cases are jurors. In the Neil Lennon case, if somebody told me that the majority of those jurors were members of the Freemasons, it wouldn't surprise me, given the verdict and given that Freemasons in Scotland have got, a very orange flavour. That wouldn't surprise me. It wasn't because he had ginger hair and they didn't like him that they came away with what McBride said was a totally inexplicable decision, a perverse decision, I think, and totally inexplicable, he called it. So I've included that. It's a petition about that. It's gathering signatures at the minute. Once that's over, well, maybe back to the wiki and do the 20s, which would take me into the height of my glory and all these interesting social events that happened in the 20s. So the grandchildren, of course, they're not going to go away. They're demanding my attention as well. There's plenty to do. There's not enough hours in the day, and I ran a business successfully for 25 years, but I don't know how I ever did, because of all the things I'm finding myself doing now, I don't know where I got a minute to run a business.
Right, your penultimate song?
My penultimate song is Mac Rebennack's Visit to Blairgowrie by Michael Mara. Mac Rebennack, of course, is Dr. John, and my son Kevin and I saw him in Glasgow. I took Kevin to see Ray Charles just at the end of his era, and Dr. John was a warm-up act there, and he was brilliant. And of course, this song is by Michael Mara, who I think's the greatest Scottish songwriter ever. It annoys me that he hasn't really been recognised. I mean, there's an exhibition at the minute in the Scottish Parliament of Andy Warhol's works, and nothing against them, but I think they'd be better having an exhibition or a tribute to a homegrown Dundee man, Michael Mara, who could write about anything. I mean, in this song, some of the lyrics are, he says, they don't know if it's the real Dr. John who's coming to Blairgowrie, and they're speculating whether it might be some pretender who comes out and, as Michael Mara says, still come out giving that old Russ Conway pish. Now, who could put Russ Conway pish in a song, words in a song, and make them musical? But not just that song. He wrote about the mill lavies in Dundee. He's wrote about everything. And again, a bit like Jackson Browne, he never compromised himself by giving up his Dundee accent or his very strong social commentary. Powerful songs like Chain Up the Swings about bigotry in all forms, religious bigotry. He writes about anything in his own really inimitable style. And it's just a sad loss that he died recently. But a wonderful Scottish talent. So it's Michael Mara and it's Mac Rebennack's Visit to Blairgowrie.
Right, we've come to the part of the programme where I give you the complete works of the dandy and a copy of the Bible to take with you to your island. Would you like a copy of the Bible?
I'll have a copy of the Bible. I'll have a copy. I'm not a religious man, and I did promise my dad, the man who brought me up, that I would never, write off my religion. And he asked me to promise him that because it had given him so much comfort in his life. So I agreed to do that, and I'll die a Catholic because of that, because I'll never say never. So maybe reading this Bible may get me back on the right track. So yes, I'll have a copy of the Bible.
Another book. What would you take and why?
I would take something to make me laugh. And I thought about this. I like your programme and all something, but I would need something to lift me when I got down. And the book that I always turn to when I'm a bit down in the dumps is a book called The Confederacy of Dunces. And it was written by an Irish-American author called John Kennedy Toole. And it was a very tragic story behind it. And he had written this book and he'd touted it around as a film script and as a book all over the place. And he couldn't get any joy with it, and he eventually took his life. And when his mother was going through his things, she found this manuscript. And she took it to publishers and they snapped it up off her. And he'd spent half a lifetime trying this and been unsuccessful, and it became a very successful book in the film. Comedy book, but a great style of writing that makes me laugh. So that would be my book, Confederacy of Dunces.
A luxury. Something to make your life on the island a bit more bearable. And remember, it can't be a telephone and it can't be another human being.
Can't be a human being, but could it be a blow-up doll? No. just joking there. No. My wife might hear this. No. It wouldn't be that. It would be the radio. I think you've had many guests have said the same thing. And yeah, the wind-up radio, and the radio was very important when I was in the Merchant Navy. The radio was my only link to Celtic on a Saturday, and in those days when we would be all over the world and you would be trying to tune in to the BBC in the hope that you would get a Scottish game. They used to play the second half of either an English or a Scottish game. The crackling radio way out there in the middle of the ocean, and if you got a Celtic Rangers game in the second half of that, and if Celtic were winning, boy, that was just, you were so happy. But you used to listen to the World Service a lot, and yeah, the radio would be a great comfort. So the wind-up radio.
Fantastic. Right, before we get into your last song, do you think you could give us a bit more information about your petition? Well,
it's a public petition. It's an e-petition. It's on the Scottish Parliament website. The petition number is 01491, and it's in my name, Tom Minogue. You go to the Scottish Parliament and follow the public petition links, and I would like to use this opportunity, to urge people to sign it and support if they agree with the terms, or if they want to criticise it, they could go there as well and make their comment. But I believe that people can change things, and I believe that secret society membership amongst our decision makers is something that we should know about. It's known about in Norway, for instance, where judges must register membership of the Freemasons. It's the law, and the more we know about where our decision makers are coming from, the better. And people can help by signing this petition. They can go online and sign it, and people can change things by doing this if they make their voices heard. And I think in the 21st century that we've got people belonging to these secret societies taking secret oaths, and we're not allowed to know about it as just plain daft. So get it signed. It's on the Scottish Parliament website.
And you'll also find that I've added links to the description of this show. Right, your final song.
My final song's a song that, when it first came out, I didn't really rate it. Here Comes the Sun, George Harrison, but it shows you what I know about it, because it wasn't the greatest Beatles or Harrison number that I could think of, and I didn't really appreciate it. And then I heard it performed by Yo-Yo Ma and James Taylor, and it's as if they could see what I couldn't see. They saw this rough stone, and they've, in my opinion anyway, they've taken it and they've cut it and they've polished it into a gem. So it's Here Comes the Sun, a song of hope, I think, under any impression, and James Taylor and Yo-Yo Ma.
Tom Minogue, thank you very much for being a Desert Island Tim.
Billy, my pleasure, and thank you.